It's a Spotify podcast.
You pushed me down, thought I'd stay on the ground, counting me.
The psychology of fear. Who benefits when you're afraid? Written and narrated by LeRoy Nellis. What if I told you that one of the most influential voices in your life doesn't belong to another person? It doesn't belong to the news. It doesn't belong to social media. It doesn't belong to your boss, your family, or even your closest friends. It belongs to fear. Think about that. Fear has probably influenced more of your decisions than you realize. Not because fear is evil, because fear is persuasive. It whispers. Instead of shouts, it convinces. Instead of commands, it doesn't usually say, don't do it. It says, what if? What if you fail? What if they laugh? What if you lose? What if you're wrong? What if you embarrass yourself? What if things get worse? Notice something fear regularly claims: to know the future. It simply asks questions that make uncertainty feel like certainty. Now let me ask you something. How many opportunities have you walked away from because something that never actually happened? Think about that. How many conversations did you never have? How many businesses were never started? How many relationships were never repaired? How many dreams never left a notebook? Because fear wrote the ending, because the story never began. Here's something fascinating. Fear has kept human beings alive for thousands of years. If our ancestors weren't afraid of cliffs, storms, predators, or poisonous snakes, you and I probably wouldn't be here. Fear isn't a design flaw, it's a survival system. The problem is your brain doesn't always distinguish between a charging bear and an uncomfortable conversation. Your heartbeat increases, your breathing changes, your muscles tighten, your attention narrows, your body prepares to survive, even if the only thing standing in front of you is a difficult decision. Think about that. Your body can react to a job. Your body can react to a job interview the same way it reacts to genuine danger. That's incredible. And sometimes it's incredibly unhelpful. So today, I don't want to teach you how to eliminate fear. I don't think that's possible. And honestly, I don't think it's desirable. Fear has a purpose. The real question is, who's making the decision? You or your fear? I've learned something that changed the way I think about fear. Fear is an advisor, not a leader, an advisor. Raises concerns, a leader makes decisions. The moment fear starts making your decisions, it quietly becomes your future. Think about that. If fear decides whether you apply, whether you speak, whether you forgive, whether you leave, whether you begin, whether you try, then fear has taken the driver's seat. And very few people arrive at the life they wanted by letting fear hold the steering wheel. My name is LeRoy Nellis. This is Resilience Radio. Today we're talking about the psychology of fear. Not to eliminate it, not to ignore it, but to understand it. Because once you understand how fear works, you stop asking, How do I get rid of it? And you begin asking a much better question. Who benefits when I'm afraid? Let's get into it. Fear is a terrible fortune teller. I want you to think back to something you were absolutely convinced was going to happen. Maybe you thought you were going to fall. No. Maybe you thought you were going to fail. Maybe you thought everyone would reject your idea. Maybe you thought that conversation would end your relationship. Maybe you thought you'd never recover from a setback. Now ask yourself, did it happen exactly the way you imagined? Probably not. Sometimes things were better, sometimes they were worse, but almost never were they identical to the story fear created. That's because fear isn't predicting the future, it's preparing you for possibilities. Those are different things. Think about weather. Think about a weather forecast. If the forecast says there's a chance of rain, you might bring an umbrella. That's wisdom. But if you cancel every outdoor plan for the next 6 months because it might rain, that's no longer preparation. That's surrender. Fear works the same way. Healthy fear says prepare. Unhealthy fear says don't begin. That's a crucial difference. Fear often speaks with absolute certainty. This will never work. They'll never understand. They'll never recover. You'll notice something. Fear loves the words. Always and never. Reality rarely does. Life is usually more complicated, more surprising, and more hopeful than fear is willing to admit. Here's the first framework I want you to remember. The fear filter. Whenever you're about to make an important decision, ask yourself, am I responding to evidence or to an imagination? Because fear often dresses imagination in clothes of certainty. When fear is your friend. Before we go any further, I want to make something clear. Fear is not the enemy. Think about that. Without fear, our ancestors wouldn't have had survived. Without fear, you might walk into traffic, touch a hot stove, or ignore a tornado siren. Fear has a purpose. It tells us to pay attention. The problem isn't fear. The problem is when fear starts making decisions that wisdom should be making. There's a difference. Healthy fear says, slow down. Unhealthy fear says, don't move. Healthy fear says, prepare. Unhealthy fear says, quit. Healthy fear says, look before you leap. Unhealthy fear says, never jump. Think about that. One version of fear protects your future, the other steals it. Imagine standing at the edge of a mountain. Healthy fear says, watch your footing. Unhealthy fear says, never climb mountains. Again. Unhealthy fear says, never climb mountains again. Same emotion, completely different outcomes. The goal isn't to eliminate fear. The goal is to teach fear its proper job. The fear filter. I told you earlier about the fear filter. Let's make it practical. Whenever fear shows up, ask 2 questions. Question number 1. What facts do I actually know? Not assumptions, not predictions, facts. Question number 2. What story is fear adding? Let's say your boss says, I need to see you tomorrow morning. Let's say your boss says, I need to see you tomorrow morning. The fact your boss wants to meet tomorrow, now listen to fear. I'm getting fired. They found out. This is going to be terrible. Those aren't facts. Those are chapters. Fear started writing. Those are chapters fear started writing. Maybe the meeting is about a promotion. Maybe it's about a new project. Maybe it's about nothing. You've imagined. Fear filled in the blanks. And our brains are remarkably good at believing the stories we write ourselves. The possibility test. Fear asks one question over and over again. What if everything goes wrong? That's a reasonable question. Sometimes. But here's another question. What if it goes right? Think about that. Why do we spend so much time imagining disaster and so little time imagining success? Neither question predicts the future. One narrows your vision, the other expands it. Imagine someone thinking about starting a business. Fear says, what if I lose everything? Wisdom asks, what if I build something meaningful? Imagine asking someone on a date. Fear says, what if they reject me? Wisdom asks, what if they say yes? Think about public speaking. Fear says, what if I embarrass myself? I should know this. What if someone hears something that changes their life? That's what I hope. The facts didn't change, only the question changed. And better questions often create better decisions. The control circle. Here's another framework. Here's another framework, one that has helped me more than I can explain. I call it the control circle. Draw two circles in your mind. The outer circle contains everything you can't control. Other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, politics, traffic, the past, whether someone likes you, whether someone misunderstands you. You can spend your entire life living there, and you can still never control it. Now look at the inner circle. Your effort, your preparation, your honesty, your discipline, your response, your attitude, your words, your choices. Think about that. Peace begins when you can stop living. Peace begins when you stop trying to control the outer circle and start investing in the inner one. Fear loves the outer circle because it focuses on uncertainty. Wisdom lives inside the inner circle because that's where action lives. Why fear sells. Have you ever wondered why fear gets so much attention? Think about that. Headlines, breaking news, social media, advertisements, political campaigns. Sometimes fear spreads faster than hope. Why? Because your brain is wired to notice danger. Thousands of years ago, missing one threat could cost you your life. Missing one opportunity usually doesn't. So your brain developed a negativity bias. It pays extra attention to potential danger. That's useful when there's a bear. That's useful when there's a bear outside your cave. It's less useful when you're scrolling through headlines designed to capture your attention. Think about that. The human brain often treats possibility like probability. Just because something could happen, it doesn't mean it's likely to happen. That's important. Fear often asks, could this happen? Wisdom asks, how likely is it? Those are very different questions. The next time someone tries to sell you something using fear, pause. Ask yourself, am I making this decision because I understand the situation or because someone made me afraid? That's a question worth asking every single time. the fear of failure and the fear of regret. I want to ask you something. Which is heavier, failure or regret? Most people would probably say failure. I don't, because failure usually teaches regret, usually lingers. Think about that. Failure says, I tried. Regret whispers, I wonder what would have happened. Those are very different conversations. Imagine two people. One starts a business, it doesn't work. They learn, they recover, they build something better later. The second person never starts. 20 years pass. Every time they drive by someone else's successful business, they quietly wonder, what if? Fear protected them from failure, but it also protected them from possibility. Sometimes fear doesn't rob us. It created pain. Sometimes it robs us by preventing growth. One of the greatest tricks fear ever learned was convincing people that avoiding risk is the same thing as staying safe. It's not. There are risks to action, but there are also risks to inaction. Think about that. Not speaking up is a decision. Not applying is a decision. Not forgiving is a decision. Not changing is a decision. Fear loves the illusion that standing still has the consequences. Life says otherwise. The tomorrow's test. Here's another framework that has helped me through some difficult moments. I call it the tomorrow test. Whenever fear starts shouting, ask yourself 3 questions. Will this matter next week? Will it matter next month? Will it matter next year? Think about that. Sometimes today feels enormous because we're standing inside it, but time changes perspective. Remember something that completely consumed you. 5 years ago, you probably struggled. You probably struggled to remember it. Not because it wasn't real, because life kept moving. Fear often magnifies the present. Wisdom considers the future. Now, there's exceptions. Some decisions absolutely matter. Health, family, integrity, character, those deserve careful attention, but fear doesn't always know the difference between a life-changing decision and an embarrassing moment. It reacts to both. That's why the tomorrow test creates breathing room. It asks, is this reality? No. Is this really as permanent as it feels? Sometimes the answer is yes. Most of the time, it isn't. Courage has been misunderstood. I think we've misunderstood what courage is. People imagine the courageous person as someone who feels no fear. I don't believe those people exist. The firefighters who run into a burning building, the police officers who respond to dangerous situations, the military who deploy to uncertainty, the entrepreneur risking everything to build a company, the parent waiting outside an operating room, the person walking into the chemotherapy. Do you think they're fearless? Probably not. They're human. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's making the right decision while fear is sitting beside you. Think about that. Fear can speak. Fear can advise. Fear can warn. But fear doesn't have to decide. Fear can ride, but it doesn't drive. I think this may be the most important thing I've learned about fear. Imagine your life is a car. You're driving. Next to you is fear. Fear isn't tied up. Fear isn't locked. Fear isn't locked in the trunk. Fear gets a seat. Why? Because sometimes fear notices things you should notice. A dangerous road, a bad investment, an unhealthy relationship. Fear has value, but here's the rule. Fear doesn't get the steering wheel. Think about that. Too many people either ignore fear or obey it completely. Neither approach is wise. Instead, acknowledge it, listen to it, question it, then decide for yourself, because once fear starts driving, your destination quietly changes. You begin avoiding instead of pursuing, protecting instead of growing, surviving instead of living. And one day you wake up, not because life went wrong, but because fear successfully convinced you never to discover what was possible. That's the tragedy. Not failure, not finding out who you might have become. What I had to learn. I've spent a lot of time thinking about fear. Not because I wanted to, because life gave me plenty of opportunities to meet it. Recently. And here's what I discovered. Fear has a very convincing voice. It sounds logical. It sounds reasonable. Sometimes it even sounds responsible. It tells you to wait a little longer, to prepare a little more, to think about it one more time, to stay where it's familiar, to avoid the risk, to avoid the disappointment, to avoid the possibility of getting hurt. And sometimes that's exactly the right advice. But not always, because there comes a but not always. Because there comes a moment when preparation quietly becomes procrastination, when caution becomes avoidance, when protecting yourself starts preventing you from becoming yourself. Think about that. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't taking the leap. Sometimes the greatest danger is spending your entire life standing at the edge. Who benefits when you're afraid? I want to return to the question we started with. Who benefits when you're afraid? Sometimes, no one. Fear is simply your brain trying to protect you. But sometimes fear becomes useful to other people. If you're afraid to ask questions, you never discover answers. If you're afraid to speak, your ideas remain unheard. If you're afraid to set boundaries, other people decide where they belong. If you're afraid to begin, nothing new ever begins. Think about that. Fear doesn't always build walls. Sometimes it quietly convinces you to build them yourself. And once that happens, you don't need someone else to hold you back. You're doing it for them. The chair beside you. I want you to imagine one last picture. Imagine you're sitting at the table. Across from you is your future. Beside you is fear. Fear leans over and whispers, "What if this goes wrong?" Your future doesn't interrupt. It simply waits. Now imagine another voice, quieter, calmer. It asks, "What if this matters?" Fear says, "You might fail." Wisdom says, "You might grow." Fear says, "They'll judge you." Wisdom says, "They're allowed to." Fear says, "Stay where it's safe." Wisdom says, "Nothing grows inside a comfort zone." Think about that. Fear and wisdom will always sit at the same table. Your job isn't to silence fear. Your job is to recognize which voice should cast the final vote. The final question. I want to leave you with one question. Not one you'll answer tonight, one you'll answer for the rest of your life. The next time fear speaks, don't ask, how do I make this feeling disappear? Ask something better. What decision would I make if fear was the only advisor and not my leader? Sit with that, because your answer may quietly change the direction of your life. My name is LeRoy Nellis. This is Resilient Radio. Fear is one of the oldest companions the human race has ever known. It has protected explorers before they crossed the oceans. It has protected parents raising children. It has protected workers coming home with safety. It has protected civilizations for thousands of years. Fear deserves our respect, but it should never receive our surrender. Remember this: fear can warn you, fear can prepare you, fear can slow you down when slowing down is wise, but fear was never meant to become the author of your future, because the greatest chapters of your life will almost always begin with uncertainty. Not certainty, uncertainty. Every meaningful relationship began before you knew how it would end. Every successful business began before anyone knew it would succeed. Every act of courage began before there was a guarantee. Life has never promised certainty. It has only offered possibility. So don't wait until you're no longer afraid. You may wait forever. Instead, learn to walk with fear. Listen to it, respect it, question it, but never hand it the steering wheel. Because one day you'll look back, not at the moments when you were afraid, but at the moments when you moved forward despite it. And those are the moments that become the story of your life. Until next time, protect your peace, guard your mind, choose courage, one decision at a time. Godspeed. Stand for the Constitution and never surrender your ability to think for yourself. I'm LeRoy Nellis, and this is Resilient Radio. I'll see you on the next episode. Good night.
You pushed me down, thought I'd stay on the ground, counting me out like the numbers didn't matter. But pressure builds diamonds in the dark, and I've been sharpening my edge in the chatter. Every scar turned into strategy, every setback fueled my clarity. I took the hits, learned the game, turned my losses into flame. Now I'm coming back strong, and you'll remember my name. I'm rising through the fire.